All right, so we're about at 12 noon, so we'll get this thing kicked off. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center here at K-State. I'm so excited that you came to our professional development event today. This is part of the TLC's, the Teaching and Learning Center's Professional Development Series. We have events every week. Our last one for the semester is next Wednesday. Next Wednesday, we'll be doing a teaching chat where you can bring any questions, concerns, issues you've been having, maybe some successes to be celebrated, all of those kind of things. We'll be happy to talk about that. Today, though, I'm going to talk about you should be writing tips for consistency and success. And you should be, and we all should be, and we're gonna get into that as we continue. So I appreciate you being here. I'm going to share my screen. This never takes me less than about 30 seconds, so I apologize in advance. All right. So Stu, is that showing what I wanted to show? Stu says yes. So here we go. So as we're going through, I will do my best to keep track of the chats and all of those other kinds of things. But Noah, I'll ask if you could keep me on track with the chat too. If I miss some stuff, that would be amazing, as I have multiple things kind of going on here at once. All right, found my cursor. Excellent. So the reason that you're all here today is you should be writing, and your schedules probably look something like this, right? We always should be writing. And you might tell yourself things like this, and I love this song. And if you've seen How I Met Your Mother, they have a great storyline that represents this song, but I will write 500 words and I will write 500 more. There's a couple of different places that you can go to find reassurance for the things that we go through as academics. And one of this is the Facebook group Shit Academics Say. And I highly recommend following if this is your kind of sense of humor. This is my sense of humor. But active voice, I will write. Passive voice, writing will be done. Passive aggressive voice, I love how you always say you'll write, but never do. Why should we write more? Why is this something that we naturally kind of think that we should do? And I don't ask rhetorical questions. So you can either unmute yourself and say it out loud, or you can drop it in the chat. But why should we write more? All right, excellent. We got a lot of stuff coming in here. First person said, helps us think, right? It's a great way to organize our thoughts. Excellent. To enhance our skill expressing our thoughts. Absolutely. It helps our communication skills because we have something worth saying. That is excellent. And getting that out there so someone else can know what we said is excellent. Building our CV, so kind of that extrinsic reinforcer. I've heard people say, publication is the coin of the realm in academia. So having those publications on your CV might get you a job, might get you an award, might get you tenure promotion, might get you a merit increase if we ever have raises. Those kind of things might help. Stu says maybe we should write more to make it a habit. And I do think habit building is a key to this, as we'll kind of see. Writing helps us reflect and think. Writing more makes us better, just like practicing anything else. And there are really only two ways, by the way, to get better at writing. One is to write more. The other is to read more. There's the only two ways. There's no shortcuts. I'm going to tell you ways to get yourself to do it. But the only ways to actually get better at being a writer are to write more and to read more. Actually get manuscripts done in a timely manner. Be better writers, to have knowledge to share with the world. It always gets pushed to the bottom of the to-do list. That is something that is a barrier we're going to talk about here in a second, because writing does not produce the immediate gratification that many other of our responsibilities do. We'll get to that in a second. To be able to help our students be better writers, we have grants and manuscripts to work on, and writing makes us better readers. Excellent. So we know that we should do this more. We know we should be motivated to do this more, but for lots of reasons, we don't do it more. So now we're going to do the waterfall chat. You're going to write your answer in, but everyone's going to hit return at the same time. Why don't we write more? And Natalie's response about why we put this at the bottom of the to-do list, maybe write that again or articulate that again, because I want to come back to that one too. So hold on to those answers for just a second till I say go. All right, hit return. Let us know why we don't write more. All right, all those came in. Probably didn't have a hard time thinking about those barriers that get in the way of writing. So time, because we don't feel prepared to. Too much service, and that one's in all caps with an exclamation mark. So that was definitely a big one. Pop-up stuff, right? Those things that happen, our schedule might say writing, but that's before you knew that student concern was happening. That's before you knew you were having applicants visit your department this week, like ours is, to interview for jobs. Those kind of things suddenly show up. You got to deal with them. Too busy doing other things. I think it's the rare academic who's not writing because they're sipping boat drinks, watching TV. I think it's probably that academic is doing 100 other things that academic needs to be doing, and that's getting in the way. Busy, distractions, right? Writing is hard. It's easy to be distracted from writing because you need a lot of cognitive effort for your writing. Other more immediate due dates, perfectionism and procrastination, right? Sometimes we get in our own way about kind of saying, well, if it's not going to be perfect, and if I have these other things to do, I'll push it off. These are things we have in mind. It isn't fun. That's a sense that a lot of people have. I actually think writing is awesome. I think it's fun. I'm going to share that with you, but I'm in the minority, I think, and a lot of people that I talk to. So we're going to address that one as we progress, because for a lot of times the writing isn't fun, or the thing we're writing isn't fun. I will acknowledge that while I love writing, I have hated every paper I've ever written at some point. There's some point of every writing project where I hate the thing. Then I come back around, but there's always a point in a project where I hate it. Teaching coming first, not knowing where to start, easiest thing to put back, not having motivation, having writer's block, right? Not knowing how to get those words started takes a ton of time. Too much going on in life. We tend to do what is urgent over what is important. And other people are kind of doubling down on that one too. So there's lots of reasons for why we don't write more. For instance, Kermit talking to evil Kermit here, right? Time to write that dissertation chapter, but Stranger Things isn't going to watch itself. Being a good writer, 3% talent, 97% not being distracted by the internet. How my week went. By the way, PhD Comics, if you are in graduate school or you mentor graduate students, I highly recommend you check out PhD Comics. Wonderful ways to kind of see a humorous look on many of the things that we do here. You see a pie chart. Amount of time I spent being productive. You see that little slice, the big slice, amount of time doing things I thought would make me more productive, right? Kind of looking for that hack, right? So even today, right, we're coming to this talk rather than writing. I hope this is going to be time well spent, but not all of our time can be spent at the talks and the workshops. Sometimes we got to apply what we learned at the talks and the workshops. When you begin getting your first draft, dark and difficult times lie ahead. And this is how we sometimes have our mentoring be, right? Either as the mentor or as the student. Do you have any specific feedback or comments for me, Professor Smith? Yes. Do more. Could you be a little more specific? Do more now. That's too specific. Grad school is easy. It's like riding a bike. The bike's on fire, ground's on fire, everything's on fire because you're in hell, right? These are sometimes those psychological experiences that we have. So coming from this rather dismal, pessimistic start, I do think that there's light at the tunnel. I think there's optimism because I think writing is awesome. And my goal today is to help you make writing a consistent priority for you, to help reduce binge writing tendencies. What is binge writing?
Just writing long sections over long periods of time and then taking longer breaks in between.
All right. So I'm going to say long sections in short periods of time, taking long breaks in between is typically what binge writing is, right? So you do all your writing in a couple of days or a couple of weeks for that big thing, and then you don't write anymore. The issue with binge writing, number one, the quality is probably not going to be where it needs to be. It's not very fun. And it's hard to get started again. So I don't think binge writing is really the way that we should go. I think it's often the way that we have to go when a deadline is coming up. And by the way, a lot of people say, I only write well near the deadline. I don't think that's ever true. I think it's you only write near the deadline. I think you would write better if you didn't write at the deadline. So what we're going to try to do is reduce some of those binge writing tendencies. I think this is going to make the quality better. I think it's also going to make the experience more positive. Going to try to increase that productivity, right? So get those things out there for others to read and hopefully make them things that people want to read. And as we're doing this, allow ourselves to engage in that writing process, to have that transcendent experience, that experience of positivity, that we're doing good things. Now, if you're interested in writing more, there's a million talks and workshops. There's a million books that have been written about this. One of my favorites, and we'll provide you a little bit of summary of the book. If you want to read the book, it's an easy, nice, awesome, light read. But if not, I'm going to boil it down to you in a couple of slides. But one book that I think is an awesome resource is the book called How to Write a Lot by Paul Sylvia. Paul Sylvia is a graduate of the University of Kansas. We're going to like him anyway. And basically what Paul Sylvia did is said, how are we going to get this done, right? And he boiled it down to its fundamentals. He boiled it down to just the mechanistic process of how to write a lot. And I love the title. It's a great title. So these are several of Paul Sylvia's top fundamental recommendations. You're probably not going to be surprised by some of these, because these are things that you're going to hear from everyone who tries to get you to write more. First, make and use a schedule during working hours. A lot of people think, well, I'm going to do my writing on the weekend, which for them might not be a working hour. That might be a time that they have devoted to family or, cognitive renewal or fun times, whatever. If you're having to give up your time with family or your self-care time, that's not going to be sustainable. That's going to be something that's going to ruin that process and make it really negative for you. So making and using the schedule, and then do it during working hours, right? Find those pockets of time to do in there. He said that people who write a lot plan a lot. They look at their to-do list, they look at their schedules, and they find those pockets of time. They schedule in those pockets of time, and to the extent that they can, they adhere to that schedule. So thinking, this Friday afternoon, this is what I'll do, that's great. But also understanding if you're not an afternoon person, if that's not when you're cognitively at your best, that's not a good period of time to put for your writing. I myself, for instance, am a morning person. I find that I do best when I write in the morning. That's when I'm most cognitively alert. That's when my thoughts are really processing. It's a great start to my day. It gets me invigorated. So for me, if I plan my writing later in the day, it's not going to be as good. I'm not going to enjoy it as much, and it's not going to be as productive. So Paul Sylvia kind of talked about, think about when it's going to work for you, not just in your schedule, but for you as a person and who you are. He also recommends you track your progress towards your goals. This is something I also recommend, and I'll give a little bit more specifics later on about what I try to track. I don't track as well as I used to because I don't have to. But tracking progress towards your goals is great. Also, choose good, simple words. One of you had mentioned kind of having writer's block. Writer's block is sometimes that phenomenon where you don't know what to say next. Paul Sylvia is going to say, and I'm going to agree, say something. Put it down, make it good, make it simple, make the idea clear. If you need to wordsmith that later, it's always easier to revise later after you've written. Creation is hard, revision is easier. So get the idea down however you need to, good, simple words, even notes to yourself. That's going to be helpful. He talks about making and using outlines. This is, again, something that is probably not that surprising, to think about laying out what you're going to write before you actually getting into the details and writing it. So these are fundamental. These are things that didn't surprise me. They probably don't surprise you. But he also had some recommendations that I did find surprising. Maybe they don't surprise you as much as they surprised me. So I wanted to share those too in case these were helpful. The first of these is that Paul Sylvia says that writing should be mundane and boring. I myself disagree because I love to write. I actually find it very invigorating. But what he's saying is, if you expect it to be mundane and boring, you'll be okay, right? On those days where you're just kind of trudging through and you kind of get stuff down, if you expected it to be boring, that met your expectations. But if you found fulfillment, that's awesome. So it's kind of like managing those expectations to make the writing process as positive as it can be. Realize someday you're just reporting. You're not creating, you're not devising, any of that. Some days you're just putting down what you need to put down. So recognizing that, he says, is kind of empowering to embrace the experience. This next one I love, and I was surprised when I heard it, but it made completely, totally sense, is never reward writing with not writing. Never say, I've written enough, so I get to stop. Never say, I've met my goal, so I can do the better things. What that does is it psychologically makes writing a chore, makes it more of an extrinsically motivated task rather than an intrinsically motivated task that you derive inherent pleasure from. So this one I really loved. Also mentioned, and this is for, I'm thinking about those of us who write journal articles and the empirical sciences and things like that. Often in our discussion sessions, we'll have to put down the limitations of our work. And Sylvia says, don't waste your time on the obvious limitations. Your readers already know those, or at most spend a tiny bit of time on it, but actually talk about the real limitations of your work and how this could be corrected in terms of future directions. So I really liked that one in time of a very specific thing that I can do in my own work and help my graduate and undergraduate research collaborators do in theirs. He talked about writing to achieve success rather than to avoid failure. Think about what you're going to do, not what's going to happen to you if you don't do that. So that kind of positive, more optimistic orientation will help us be more motivated in our writing. He also says, rejections are the sales tax of publication. So the peer review process is an awful process, except that I can't think of a better idea, right? So what happens in science, I submit my work for publication. Reviewers are going to read my work. They're going to give me critiques on that work. I often disagree with the critiques on that work. And sometimes work that's rejected when I feel that it shouldn't be. And Paul Sylvia said, yeah, it's going to happen. And it's going to happen a lot. So what he's basically doing is just trying to orient us to that when we send our work out there for others to read, which is often a barrier to writing, is we don't want other people to reject our work. However, if we don't let them reject our work, we've rejected it ourselves. So let the reviewers reject you rather than rejecting ourselves, and understand everybody gets rejected is just part of the process. This one I love too, and it didn't make sense to me, is that, again, the way that my manuscript's set up, we have an introduction, a method, a results section, a discussion. It's kind of that typical APA format for an empirical research report. He's saying, write your introduction last, because you can't introduce something you haven't read. And that kind of, made sense to me. We think about like introducing. If I was going to introduce Ted to the rest of you, I have to meet Ted before I can introduce Ted, right? So when I say, have you met Ted? If I'm going to tell you who Ted is, I have to have met Ted first. So kind of knowing, we've got to know where that paper is going before we introduce that paper. This was kind of an organizing thought, because I think when I was an undergraduate, they taught me write the intro first. And he's saying, no, maybe write the intro later in that process, so the intro actually introduces the study that you're about to run, for instance. Now, this book isn't perfect. I got some reservations that I do want to share. First of all, as I mentioned, I don't think writing has to be horrible, right? I think if we're telling people it's going to be mundane and boring, it might set up that self-fulfilling prophecy. I understand the value in managing some of those expectations, but try to think about, I go in expecting it to go well, and I want it to go well, and I typically enjoy doing it. So I don't want to go in with those managed expectations, but that's just me. And one of the things that I will say, and I'll repeat this throughout my presentation today, is anything that works for me might not work for you. And feel free to discard any recommendation that I make. And this goes for writing, this goes for teaching, this goes for whatever. But just kind of understand there are things that you can kind of pick and choose that work for you. They might not work for me, and vice versa. Paul Sylvia does have kind of a part of his book, if you read it, where he talks about taking very hard lines with collaborators. And if I'm collaborating with Stu, for instance, and saying, hey, Stu, you got to have your stuff done by Friday. Stu has life happen. Stu has the semester happen. He doesn't get it done by Friday, being very hard in our steer on Stu. I think we have to be careful about that, right? Stu wouldn't appreciate that. That's not going to help our collaboration. Might not also be fair to Stu. And depending on where you are in your career, you might not be in a position to do that, right? If you're a visiting assistant professor, telling that full professor in your department with tenure that they need to really get their game going, that might be kind of a tenuous situation that you're in. That might introduce some vulnerability. So I'll say just be careful if you're reading that through, and give yourself license to discard any of those recommendations. He also had a comment in there that I felt could be misinterpreted about not trying to publish everything. And I agree. You should only try to publish stuff that you think other people will want to read and stuff that is worth reading. What I'm afraid, though, is that if someone suffers from some of that imposter phenomenon, that none of my stuff is worth reading, that they might actually then never publish. So if you're reading this through this kind of, don't try to publish too much, don't try to publish stuff that's not great. If you're concerned about what is worth publishing or not, maybe seek feedback from a colleague or from a mentor to let them help you with that decision if you tend to be super self-critical. Also, in his book, it is very clear that he's not dealing with family responsibilities. He's not dealing with a lot of the things that you might be dealing with, that I might be dealing with in our lives. It might be a little bit of a gendered perspective even, but he's basically talking about, like, when I write, I shut everything else out. I don't respond to anyone else. And, that time is completely untouchable by anyone else, and my family and my workplace, any of that. That might not be your situation, and you might not want that to be your situation. So just kind of understand that if you have other responsibilities, writing does not necessarily trump all of those. And then this is just one of my pet peeves. So if you're not in my research lab, you might not get how much a pet peeve is. I love saying such that, and I like the word individuals. He said never use them. So now he is my mortal enemy on those two topics. So this is where Paul Sylvius started. And what I want to do is I want to supplement these with additional recommendations that I have that I think might be helpful for you. First of all, and by the way, anytime you see kind of that hyperlink here, we got a video on this too that you can check out through our Engage the Sage YouTube channel. You can check that out. And at the end, I'm happy to share this presentation with anyone. We'll post it up on the TLC website. And also later on, I'll be talking about a syllabus for a class that I taught on writing. Happy to share that syllabus too. First additional recommendation: beware the myth that you need a lot of time to write. A lot of us think we need a 3-hour block, a 4-hour block, a whole day to write. You will never get that block. If your schedule is anything like mine, that block's not coming. What I recommend is finding little pockets of time. I can do something on a manuscript if I'm preparing myself to do it in as little as 5 or 10 minutes. As long as I have a plan, I can make 5 or 10 minutes productive. Now, I'd prefer a half hour, I'd prefer an hour, but that's often not how it works. And I actually find the shorter amounts of time more frequently keep me more engaged and more invigorated by the task. So beware of that myth that you need a lot of time to write. Also, beware the myth of the muse. Some of us think we need to be inspired to write. We need to have those creative juices flowing. I don't think that's true. I think we just need to do it. Andy mentions in the chat a little bit ago that free writing helps a lot with writer's block, just getting something down on the page. So even if you're not inspired, even if you're not motivated, you can be disciplined to actually do it. So if you're not feeling it, do it anyway. And that's how things get done. If people only did things when they really wanted to do them, much less would get done. And writing, unfortunately, is one of those things we often have to do. As I mentioned earlier, do not reject yourself. Let your reviewers, the editors of those journals you submit to, or those book editors, let them reject you and provide that critical feedback. But I think it was Wayne Gretzky who said, you miss all the shots you don't take. Don't reject yourself, because you don't publish anything that you don't submit. When you're actually writing, I'm going to recommend you adhere to the 4 C's. And this is something I've talked about before, and I know a number of my students are here. My 4 C's of writing are, and you can either say it out loud or put it in the chat.
Clear, concise, compelling. Oh, this is the last one.
Ironically, you missed
complete.
So clear, complete, concise, compelling. If you shoot for those 4 Qs, and these are the 4 Qs that I use in my writing: clear, complete, concise, compelling. If you do those 4 things, your writing is probably going to be pretty decent. So those are things that I found work for me. I love these little tiny sound bites, these little memory strategies for me that keep me on pace. I use clear, complete, concise, compelling to guide me in my writing. It helps me a lot. Schedule your writing and write consistently. I would rather see the people that I'm mentoring schedule in half an hour, 4 days a week, than 2 hours, 1 day a week. I think it sets that habit that Stu is happening better. I think it keeps you fresh for the entirety of that 30-minute session rather than hitting fatigue kind of 2 hours in. I find myself, I have a lot of incubation time when I write. So if I write for half an hour today, before my session tomorrow, I'll be thinking about what it is I want to write. When I sit down again, I have the benefit of that thinking. If I have 2 hours every Friday, the first part of my session each week will be reminding me what I need to be doing because it's been a whole week since I've done it before. So I'm going to schedule my writing, and I'm going to schedule it consistently throughout the week in small time blocks that I'm more likely to be able to hit. And then if I have what I call windfall time, I have some time that happened up later, I know where to start. So this is something I highly recommend. I also am a huge fan of building momentum. So start with the easy stuff first. I've mentioned in research reports, we use APA format. So what that means, when I write a manuscript, it has a title page where I get the titles, I got the authors, I get an abstract next. The third page will start the introduction. I'll repeat the title on that. Then I'll have sections for the method, the participants, the materials, the procedure. I'll have a results section. I'll have a general discussion section. In the general discussion section, I might have a limitation section. I might have a future direction section. I might have a conclusion section. I might have a new page for references. I'm going to new page for each table, a new page for each figure. What I will do when I first start to write a manuscript is I'll put the titles and the authors on that first page. Then I will set up the rest of the manuscript. What that means, before I've written a word of substance, I have an 8-page document. When I've put in the page breaks and I've set up those sections, I automatically find a little bit of fulfillment that I've started to actually work on something rather than just looking at a blank page with nothing on it. Seeing that 8-page document with all the headings and all the things in place helps me to get going. Then, when you're actually doing the writing, I find the method section is the easiest part of a research report to write. I'll write that first. In writing the method section, I'm getting a lot of stuff done without a ton of cognitive effort. I can start to then think about how I want to structure the results section from that method section. I can think about what tables I want to include, and I'll start to put placeholders in. So what happens is, as I start to cue myself and start to build this out with the easy stuff, I eventually gain momentum and motivation to write the harder parts, like the introduction and the general discussion. I also try to make sure that what I'm reading is not god-awful boring. Because if I'm writing something that someone else will not want to read, it's not worth my time to write it. So if I'm ever bored by my narrative, I need to fix that. So I always have in the back of my mind of thinking about, what will my readers want to read, and what will my reviewers and editors want to read? So thinking from that empathetic third-party perspective helps me craft my narrative in dealing with the issues that they might want me to resolve and the things that they would want me to include. Also, real practical tip, I set myself up for success for my future writing sessions. There's a couple of ways that I do this. One of my favorites is I end with an incomplete sentence. So what happens is I will start an incomplete sentence. When I start writing again, I start exactly at the point where I left off. I know exactly where I need to go next. And often in that time between writing sessions, how I'm going to finish that sentence will incubate. Now, for some of you who are more completionistic and perfectionistic, you might die in doing this, as I see the note in the comment. But for me, it's a great tactic. Now, for you, what you might want to do is to write the transition sentence into the next paragraph, or the new heading that you'll handle next, or even put a placeholder for the citation you're going to discuss next. But for me, I absolutely love putting in that incomplete sentence, and that works for me. One of my other strategies, I'll often write the first sentence of every paragraph before I finish any paragraphs, because what I do there is I know where I'm writing to, and that helps me with the transitions. It's funny. Someone said I live on the edge. Only here. Everywhere else, I'm completely risk averse. But when I write, try to do these crazy stuff. One person said they end each writing session by taking note of what they just did and their next task. Yes, anything you can do to set up that next writing session is going to be helpful, because especially for binge writers who have long periods of time between their sessions, they often don't know where to start. So they spin their wheels. Most of that cracked me up. Thank you. I want to spend less time spinning my wheels and more time typing keys. So this is something that I try to do. Whoops, wrong way. Something you can do is to have an accountability partner. One of the things we do in my grad lab meetings, we go around the room and talk about writing progress. If people haven't written that week, they have to admit it out loud. So a little bit of that social pressure can create some of the accountability. Get feedback on your writing. Have people read it and tell you what they honestly think. This is going to be something that's helpful. Try to find people who are going to give you constructive feedback, not just tell you it sucks, but say it'd be better if. That is a better way to craft that feedback. Reward yourself for writing, and then eventually let writing be its own reward. One of the things that I find is I find a lot of fulfillment when I complete a writing session. No matter how short it is, when I have completed a writing session, I feel great. So one of the things that I try to do is to get those writing sessions so I'll have that feeling of greatness. Having said that, Reese's peanut butter cups at the end of a writing session, not a bad deal. So if you can find something that's going to kind of make you feel good about doing it, absolutely. So Melissa asked an excellent question. How do you stay on the emotionally safe side of accountability and not move into shame when people have to admit they didn't write? I would say don't shame them. I think it's a situation where I don't want to make it normative, us missing our writing goals. But if someone said, hey, life happened this week, so they didn't get much done, I say, okay, well, let's hope for a better week this week, and then kind of move on. I don't think, and my grad lab can maybe disagree if they like, but I don't think we move to the shame kind of part of that. But that is something you have to be careful of. Excuse me. Someone else said, I always write the method section first when the details are fresh in my mind, often while we're collecting data. Really bad at doing that much later when you don't remember that detail. That's a really important point, especially if a research project might span a couple of years. Knowing what you did and have a good written record of that is going to help not only the manuscript, but help make sure that you have the integrity of that project retained. Excellent point. And just get something on the page. I hate looking at a blank page, so I'll write some stuff down. I might even write down something like, I'm having a hard time starting here. I need a good example to set up this construct. Even doing that, I think, is better for me than staring at a blank page. And maybe what you can do is you can say, you know what? I want to inspire myself. I want to inspire some of my students to write more. So maybe you teach a writing seminar. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to give you an overview of a writing seminar that I taught a couple of years ago that really inspired me and my graduate students to write. So and this is how we got into the Teaching and Learning Center PD series, right? It's not just professional development. There's a teaching component here too. In this writing seminar, this was Psych 959, Graduate Seminar in Social Psychology with the special title, Social Psychology Writing Practicum. I taught this in the spring of 2017, excuse me. The course description, and I'm not going to read the entire course description to you, and I will provide the syllabus for anyone who wants it. So I have this. I will let you know, though, that I wrote the syllabus in 2017, and some of the empathetic course design stuff that I've included since then is not represented in there. So you might say, I thought you said you should have an empathy statement. This one didn't because it's for, I thought, it's smart enough to do empathy statements. So just be aware, this is a 5-year ago syllabus. So in the first part of my course description, as you can see in the highlighted part, our goal of this semester is to increase your chances of success in publication and to keep you from being lost. I try to be empathetic to the emotional and the psychological barriers to writing, not only kind of the mechanistic ones. The seminar will consist of a writing practicum that will result in the creation of written research products that will empirically investigate issues related to social psych research. So this is not creative writing. And if you were doing this in creative writing or in your own discipline, this might have to tweak some. But I was doing this for social psychological empirical research reports that would be submitted to peer-reviewed journals. That was what we were shooting for. And what we wanted is the completion of that work that would then be either submitted for publication or, if the project wasn't ready yet, provide the basis for future research studies. The student learning outcomes that I identified here were critique the theoretical foundations, method results, and conclusions of research products. So I want you to be able to read the published work and to understand the good and the bad about it. Also understand and empathize with the fact that published work is not perfect work, as I think that's sometimes things that are barriers to our writing. Provide critical feedback on research products to colleagues professionally and constructively. I think that providing that constructive feedback is something that we can use a little bit more instruction in. If you've ever seen the Facebook group, Reviewer 2 Must Be Stopped, what will happen is people often share the awful things that reviewers and editors have said to them about their work. I think what we could do here is actually to teach them the process of constructive peer review. Also to receive critical feedback on research products from colleagues professionally and constructively, and then to look for the nuggets of improvement that comes in those critiques. Also wanted them to lead and facilitate discussions on primary literature, research products, and future research directions. So to convey these orally, to prepare and deliver conference-style oral presentations of research proposal ideas and/or research results, and answer audience questions professionally. So getting that work out there in more than just the publication domain, also the oral presentation domain. Also wanted them to do formal peer reviews of research proposals and/or manuscripts. Again, this is a professional skill that our fields expect of us as good citizens of our disciplines. This is something I wanted to give them feedback and training in. Prepare APA-style research proposals and/or manuscripts that incorporate feedback from peer reviews. During the peer review process, there's that revision period. And often what we have to do is to write these cover letters that talk about how we adapted our resubmissions to the initial peer reviews that we had received. So I wanted to train the students in the class how to do that. Also wanted them thinking about how to design programmatic research studies that would extend the social psych research literature in innovative, compelling, and interesting ways. I wanted them to discover, practice, and archive recommendations and best practices for increasing the likelihood of successful publication to inform ourselves. So idiosyncratically, what works for me, for instance, but also for those I mentor and teach. The graduate students that I have in my classes are typically people who are going to be professors. So I want them thinking not only how to increase their own writing productivity and success, but how to help their students increase their productivity and success. And then finally, to implement and evaluate strategies to become a more productive writer. As you'll kind of see as I go through the overview of class topics, they came up with personal idiosyncratic, that's the word I was looking for, idiosyncratic strategies to help them individually be better writers. And then they evaluated the effectiveness over that strategy over a short period of time. So this is what the course looked like. And I'm not going to go through every single week, but what you're going to find is that in the early parts of the semester, we're having them write lots of different things. So that might be writing, for instance, if you can see my cursor, a CV, or a letter of recommendation, or a research statement that might accompany a job application to a tenure-track position, for instance. Then they each had a week where the student would assign readings and discuss readings in one part of the week. And then the second part of the week, they would talk about their research that was inspired by that published literature. So talking about how reading the literature then inspires new research ideas. You can see that happens through a number of the semester. We read the book, How to Write a Lot, during that class. And then you can see here, about 3/4 of the way through the semester, they develop personal strategies to implement and test that they then reported on the effectiveness 2 weeks later. Because a key outcome is to find something that works for you. And I was not only the instructor of this class, but I was looking to benefit from this class. I also wanted to be inspired to increase my own writing productivity. So what I did is I developed a personal strategy that I still use with one exception, as you'll see. I still open a manuscript document every day when I get to my office. I come in, I open the thing that I should be writing. I then strive to make a noticeable change to that manuscript or a research presentation or complete a manuscript review every day. So I had to make writing process every day. Now, by the way, when I say every day, it's every work day. It doesn't count weekends or vacation. It's every work day. I want to make that change. I'll spend at least 30 minutes writing each day. My goal is 30 minutes, but what I find is it might be, one 30-minute session, 3 10-minute sessions. When I'm doing that, I find that if I get an extra 5 minutes, I can easily jump back into the project. So my 30 minutes was easily becoming 40 minutes, 45 minutes, some days an hour, hour and a half. Rarely is it going to be more than that. But I was finding it was very easy for me to get into this habit of using short periods of time to make manuscript changes. And then my personal strategy initially was to record my progress in a spreadsheet. So I had an SPSS file on my desktop where I would record each day my writing progress. And some days it was just didn't meet my goal that day. These are the things that I recorded. I won't go through all of these, but these are things that worked for me. So I had some details on what I was writing, how much progress I made, how I felt about it, etc. Well, I evaluated this over the next 6 months. And what I found is over that next 6 months, these are some of the stats. Over those 6 months, if you look at the work days, that I wrote 723 words per workday across all days, including weekends. It was 326 words a day. That was pretty excellent, in my opinion. And I met my goal almost 90% of the time on my work days of getting that noticeable change and that 30 minutes done. Felt good about that. I looked at my lab's progress. So kind of me and the people I was working with. I revised the manuscript I had been sitting on. I didn't want to work on this thing. And I got it done. I got it submitted. I actually got published. We submitted 5 new manuscripts in the next 6 months and did 11 revisions of manuscripts that we needed to get back out. And looking at my publication record, and this is my publication record across my career. I've been publishing since 2001. So I have, 22 years in publishing. You see a kind of a pretty, stable kind of publication rate here. And if you see down here, in those first 17 years before teaching the writing seminar, I have 50 publications, 50 peer-reviewed journal articles, and have averaged just under 3 a year. I then taught this writing seminar in 2017 and immediately had my best year to date in publication. This was my first year where I had double-digit publications. In the 5 years following teaching the writing seminar, we moved to 39 publications. No, these are lab publications. So these are publications that I'm not necessarily first author on, but I am an author on and contributed to some of the writing. 39 publications in the 5 years since, for an average of just under 8 publications a year. And if you're doing some math on that, it's an increase in productivity of 265% over my previous publication. So someone had asked me in the chat that I have lots of citations in Google Scholar for 2022. How strategic am I when selecting topics and when collaborating? I want to work on a project that I would want to read. If I think that it's going to be an interesting contribution to the literature, I think there's going to be value in doing it. I think it's got a pretty good likelihood of publication. I'll probably work on that. And by the way, if you look at the things that I've published, I probably publish a little bit more diversely than a lot of people in psychology, for instance. I have more topics of interest than a lot of people in psychology of interest. But that's something that I would recommend you do something that's manageable for you. I like to have lots of ideas. I work with lots of excellent people. So I'm not that restrictive if I think the idea is going to be worthwhile and compelling to read. Someone asked, would I be willing to share my Excel sheet I use to track my progress? I can try to. Right now, unfortunately, SPSS doesn't work on my computer. It was an SPSS file, not an Excel file, but I can try to find that for you. Now, I'm always aware that I'm not where I want to be. First of all, I'm not great at doing my manuscript reviews. I'd seen something on Shit Academics say a while ago, said there's 2 types of reviews. There's late reviews and those that are about to be late. I definitely kind of adhere to that. And I will say that I am not the model for punctuality on writing manuscript reviews for the editors that ask me to review. So that's something I'm still trying to work on. I find my own work is more exciting to me than writing a review on someone else's, particularly if I don't see there's a lot of publication value in that. I have a hard time sometimes staying on target. I find the new shiny project is sometimes more exciting than the manuscript I just have to finish. And for me, it's kind of a hard time of me getting that thing done before I move to the next thing. So that's something I'm trying to work on to this day. I've told you got to find that constructive feedback to kind of find the value in the reviews you get. I have a hard time embracing revisions. In fact, I hate to do revisions. It's something I'm trying to get better with, but I liked the manuscript before. Having someone tell me you got to make these changes to it, not my favorite part of the process. And it's hard finding that 30 minutes. Right now I'm a professor in psychological sciences. I'm the faculty associate director of the Teaching and Learning Center. I'm also the faculty senate president. It's hard to find those 30 minutes sometimes. And that's something that I struggle with probably this year more than any other. Now, what I want to do is you might say, oh, this is all hard. There's something I want you thinking about too, because there's an outlet that I really like. It's not a peer-reviewed journal, but it's an outlet I really like, and it's something called Faculty Focus. Faculty Focus is more like a newsletter. It's more like a daily newsletter than anything else, but it's a really cool way to get some of your teaching ideas out there. So if you hit that link, it'll take you to their homepage. If you click that link, it'll tell you how to submit. And I'm going to give you some of the details about how to submit there, because one of the things I love about this group is there are excellent teachers in this group have something to say that someone else would want to read about to help them be better teachers too. So what they're looking for, excuse me, what they're looking for are your best strategies basically regarding teaching. And they want you to write short stuff. 900 to 1,300 words in length, not counting references. You know, if you're writing a couple hundred words a day, you might get this done in a couple days, even a week. Submissions could consist of no more than 25% theory. The rest is practical advice. I know that people in this group have practical advice to share because I've heard your practical advice. I think there's a lot of things where we've had a conversation in here that should be a faculty focused piece. They want a more practical and informal tone that is expected. So it's easy writing. It's more free writing. It's more formal and more informal, more conversational. And articles cannot have been submitted somewhere else. And they say the review process takes 5 to 6 weeks. Please be patient. We've published there a bunch of times. It's never taken longer than like 2 or 3 weeks for them to get back to us. And oftentimes it appears in 2 or 3 weeks. So we're talking, there have been times where the idea to publication is about a month. That's kind of cool. So this is a short way. It's not going to count the same as a peer-reviewed publication on your CV or something like that, but it's a way to show that you are serious about your teaching philosophy and practices. The submission portal, very, very easy. You email a Word doc to that email address. That's it. It's something that is really, really easy to do. Are specific credentials required to submit? If there are, I'm not aware of them. I've submitted there. I know what my credentials are. I know my graduate students have submitted with me there. I've never heard credentials be part of it. In the faculty focus pieces that I've read, it appears to be a variety of people who are writing those pieces. I think what they're doing is if they think someone would want to read it, they publish it. And it's awesome. You can sign up, by the way, even if you don't want to write there, sign up for their daily notifications, and you will get faculty focus in your inbox every day. And you can see these very short, practically oriented articles to find some great teaching practices for yourself. They will ask for a brief bio of a couple hundred words. I don't know that that's part of the submission process. I think it's just so they can kind of let people know who's writing their stuff. For instance, just this past Monday, to give you an idea of the kind of things that they published an article that we submitted called 5 Things to Do During the Grumpy Time of this Semester. I love this article. It's something that, you know, I think is important that we acknowledge and recognize that toward the end of the semester, things are hard and there are things we can do to make it better. I published this with my graduate students and TLC staffers, Noah Rankin and Ashley Schiffer, but it doesn't have to be a piece of academic scholarship. It can be a good idea. And a lot of the articles that I've written there are the 5 things, the 10 things, these kind of bullet point lists kind of with a little bit of articulation. It's cool. And if you want to read that, hit that link. So one of the last writing tips that I'm going to have, and I borrow this a little bit from Daryl Bem. Daryl Bem said you should end with a bang, not a whimper. So end strongly. Now in my lab, we don't call it ending with a bang, not a whimper. We call it sticking the landing and dropping the mic. So I'm going to try to stick the landing and drop the mic here by saying you should be writing. You should want to be writing. You should prioritize writing. You should develop a plan that works for you. And you should remember that writing is awesome. So with that in mind, write all the things. And what I want to do now is I want you to tell me something, some nugget that's going to help you write more consistently and more successfully as you move forward. So I'm going to give you about 20 seconds to write down that nugget. You're going to hit enter. You're going to put that into the chat. And then we're going to discuss those. While you're doing that, I want to remind you that if you want a copy of this presentation, there are links in here, as I mentioned. You can either email me or we'll post it on the TLC website. Also, if you're interested in my 2017 writing seminar syllabus, I'm happy to share that with you as well. And with that, I'm going to end the screen share so we can do Brady Bunch View for the rest of the week. All right. So please hit enter for your takeaways. All right, a lot of great stuff coming in. So let's see. Write something. Write your next step at the end of each session. Schedule time to write each day. Think in smaller chunks of time. One meaningful change a day. I love that one. 30 minutes to write. Anything, just write. Writing is easier when it's started. Write for 30 minutes every day. You don't need a lot of time. Schedule writing time like you do your workouts. And just like your workouts, it's more important you get it done than you were truly inspired to do it. Right? The cumulative efforts will add up. Plan to do it during the work week. Yes. Someone said info overload. I apologize for that. I had a certain amount of time to share a ton of stuff with you. Watch the recording plus pause. It'll be awesome. Open a Word doc at the beginning every morning. Write in small increments. Schedule time. Write what you want to read. Think about that reader empathetically and set smaller goals. It's always easier to meet them. Awesome. So at this point, and I apologize for fire hosing you with information. It's something I tell people not to do when they're teaching, and I did it today, so poor model for that. But there was a lot of stuff that I wanted to share with you, and I appreciated you giving me that time. Are there any questions or comments that any of y'all have? Because this is something that it's not going away, right? If you stay in academia, this is something you're going to struggle with weekly throughout your career. So how do I teach collaborative writing? Collaborations, I think, work best when people know what their responsibility is, in my opinion. So I typically will teach people that if you're going to collaborate, figure out what parts you're going to write. I'm not a huge fan of having people collaborate on the same paragraph. There might be a point where, maybe Ashley writes the first draft and then I come in and I add to it. One of the strategies I often do with collaborating with my grad students is I write a ton of ideas down and then they see if those ideas actually have merit based on the literature. And then they go and say, hey, there was this one, but this one you were way off base. So knowing what your role is in the collaboration is something I think that is important to establish before the collaborative writing can be successful. Someone thoughts, what are your thoughts about being in flow in writing? Is it important? Can you get in flow in 30-minute writing sessions? So flow is kind of that optimal experience technique. There's a dude named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talks about flow and optimal experience and talks about when you're in flow, you have like time absorption. Like the time goes by in a second. I can have that happen in 30 minutes and I'm like, oh my God, I got to get to my meeting. So if you're going to do things like that, setting reminders might be kind of important to remind you got to go do the next thing. It's helpful too. I think it makes it more enjoyable. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's something that I aspire to, but even when I'm not in flow, I can make progress. I won't enjoy it as much. It won't be quite as fulfilling, but I can make progress when I'm not in flow. I think if we only allow ourselves to write well when we're in flow, we're not going to write very much. Stu says, this semester I have a goal of writing one sentence in a manuscript to be the first thing I do when I start each day. The goal is easy to achieve. It only takes a few minutes. And then I have set the tone for the day. As I suggested, often that sentence turns into a page before I even check my email. Yeah, doing this before you open your email, if you can, great strategy. Leave the document open, chip away at it through any spare minutes. Write a lot this semester with that one change to my habits. And I'll say that Stu has had an amazingly productive writing semester. I've been blown away at all the writing that Stu has done. And it's amazing that that one simple change has worked so much for him. So finding the thing that can reinvigorate this process in your productivity is awesome. And you might test some things. You might try some things out. Maybe nothing I said today worked. Maybe there's some other things you can check out. Someone said, kindly share tips on how to conquer collaborative overload in research and academic careers, which involve much writing. I collaborate very selectively. One of the things I kind of found out earlier in my career is people would invite you to collaborate. And then what happened is that wheel would spin for years without producing anything. So often what will happen is when I invest in a collaboration, I'll say, what is expected of me? What is my contribution? If that's clear and if that's something I'm willing to do, I do that. But I also try to make sure that I'm never completely reliant on my collaborations. So if that collaboration fails for any reason, for instance, the person leaves the university, right? If that collaboration fails for any reason, I don't want my career to be in the balance on that. So I try to collaborate very strategically in ways that are not risky for me when I feel like I can contribute to the collaboration. Someone asked, how do you build confidence in your writing? They struggle with second guessing their writing or feeling as to whether our writing is interesting to the reader. It's practice. And unfortunately, it's practice. I am a much better writer now than when I wrote in 2001. And one of the things you'll kind of see is my publication rates have gone up, not only because I wrote a seminar, but I've had a lot more practice. I've done a lot more. I've had a lot more experience. I have a better idea about what reviewers want. I have a better idea about what readers find compelling because I've gotten a lot of negative feedback along the way. So one of the things that I kind of recommend is write a lot, get a lot of feedback, learn from that feedback, and keep at it. It is not a situation where there's a quick hack to turn you into a great writer. This is not how this works. It's going to be effort and investment over a long period of time. And I've mentioned kind of inspiration and motivation. Inspiration and motivation are not as good as discipline when you're writing. Discipline is just doing it. Sometimes in writing, you just have to do it. If you're inspired or motivated, it's going to be better. But if you're disciplined, you'll do it more. So any other questions? All right, final thing I'm going to ask for is I've shared with you my perspective. I've shared with you Paul Sylvia's perspective. But if anyone has any tips that are beyond what they've already shared in the chat or beyond what we've shared, drop those in the chat now, because I want us to crowdsource some of this. Now I'm always looking for that nugget that's going to help me too. And you don't have to wait for me to say go, just write them if you have them. But any additional tips, that would be awesome. And for those of you who need to get off into the next meetings and all of that, thank you for coming. I really appreciated you being here. Do a post-event survey and get the the professional development certificate, apply for fellowship, all those kind of things. All right, this is an awesome one. Adopt the identity of a writer. Just think of yourself as a writer and do what a writer does. That's awesome. We actually call that alter casting in social psychology. It's when you kind of put yourself into a situation of an alter ego, and then you assume that alter ego. That's amazing. I've actually never thought of that in the writing domain, even though we have a word for it. That is awesome. I love that. Read broadly, fiction and nonfiction. Get comfortable with data. Yeah, only two ways to get better at writing is to read more and write more. And getting comfortable with data and the nuances of data and what you can say about data is going to be helpful. Do I have any specific advice for individuals who are in grad school, doing a lot of writing for grad school, but will likely be in industry after school and writing very little? I think build all the professional skills you can have from graduate school and then translate them as needed into that professional arena. I think that a lot of what research is and what writing is for people who are not going to become academics is it becomes a vehicle for their personal and professional development. So use that as an opportunity to develop yourself personally and professionally, and then understand that those skills will be applied differently in your next domain. Someone else talked about thinking about writing before sitting down. Absolutely. The term about adopting another identity is alter casting. Let's see. Someone said, write because you want to, not because you have to. I love that. And the least a writer can do is write, so write. That is fantastic. Very mechanistic. Excellent. Writing skills do help with grant writing in industry. Absolutely, for someone who has that perspective. And then removing the negative emotional component tied to writing is huge. You know, I've heard people talk even recently about how they hate writing. I don't hate writing. It's amazing. It's the only way to get my work out there to the world. Appreciate that process. This is a cool thing we get to do. So yeah, absolutely. It's something we want to do. It's not something we have to do. And when you take that orientation, it's something you want to do. It's the cool thing that you do as part of your day. It's going to be easier to get yourself to do it. All right. Well, we are about out of time, and I want to thank you so much for being a wonderful audience and for indulging me just talking at you for a really long time. Not the way I often like to present, but it happened. I just got really excited and had a lot of stuff to share. But hopefully you can find some nuggets moving forward about how you can write more consistently and more successfully. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.